In America, approximately 70 shitty action movies are made every year. Most of them go forgotten completely within 30 minutes. Among the pack are shitty films like the Fast and the Furious series, those London Has Fallen, whatever bullshit that is, and every third movie stars Nicolas Cage. It's become an epidemic. In the 80s, we had action icons like Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, even Chuck Norris. There was one movie that stood above the pack. One movie that separated the men from the boys. One movie that dared to have the balls to be as macho as possibly can be without apologizing whatsoever. Many laughed at it. But over 30 years later, it still stands as one of the greatest action films of all time. Let's review Cobra. You're the disease, he's the cure. Cobra stars Sylvester Stallone, Brigitte Nielsen, Andrew Robinson, and is directed by George P. Cosmatos. What is up, guys? Welcome to a brand new VHS review. I haven't done a VHS review since, I believe, The Hitcher last year. And funny enough, these are the reviews that I enjoy doing the most because they take me back to my childhood. They take you back to your childhood. A lot of people love the 80s because of the larger-than-life action heroes that we had back then that didn't need to wear capes. Stallone's even said this in interviews that back then they literally had to put the work in, work out every day, get the muscles to really look like live action superheroes. Now we have the MCU, we have the DCEU, we have all these comic book movies, and it seems like characters have to have superpowers to wow us. Back then, they didn't have superpowers. They just had machismo. They were badass. They were able to deliver one-liners that usually today would not go over well at all.
Come on, man. I got a bomb here. I'll kill her. I'll blow this whole place up.
Go ahead. I don't shot her.
And more importantly, we are just still so entertained by these movies. And I think Cobra is probably one of the most entertaining movies because it completely takes itself seriously. It doesn't poke its head out and say, we're just kidding. No, it rides that line all the way through. And I think because it carries it to the end of the movie, after that, we have a great time. We laugh at some of the absurdities of it, but it's still a fun, kick-ass action movie. And that's really what these movies are. They're kick-ass, action, fun, popcorn types of films. We don't ask for anything more. Now, if you remember in '85, Stallone was really at the top of his game. I mean, we're talking Rambo First Blood Part 2, which was probably at that time the highest grossing, biggest action movie ever. And then you also had Rocky IV come out that December, or I think it was late November. It surpassed expectations. This was the fourth movie in the Rocky franchise, and it was the highest grossing of the time. And because Stallone is a smart director, he often fools us because, he's always made fun of, but I think Stallone's always two steps ahead of everybody. He is a very intelligent person, and he knows what works in the marketplace and what doesn't. And sure, he's fell on his face quite a few times, and then he goes back to the Rambo well, or he goes back to the Rocky well. I think he knows when he fails, but he takes risks, he tries different things. Cobra originally was Beverly Hills Cop. Beverly Hills Cop was supposed to star Stallone, but Stallone wanted to put a lot of dark, bloody type material in that movie. He wanted to make it a very serious action film. And as we all know, Eddie Murphy stepped into that role, made it what it was. It was a really fun action film with a lot less blood. But a lot of the ideas that Stallone had for Beverly Hills Cop ended up in Cobra. And also, before we get into this, George P. Cosmatos supposedly directed this movie, but behind the scenes, Stallone really it's rumored that he directed probably like 80% of this movie. George was on set, but Stallone at the time was such a presence and such an A-type personality. You know, he wrote the screenplay for this movie. So a lot of his ideas were pushed to the front. But there was a version of this movie that was well over 2 hours. And at the time, they wanted to cut the movie down because they wanted to play it more times in theaters. And so what we have still to this day is pretty much a stripped down version. It's still highly entertaining because all the one-liners and stuff like that are in there. All the eccentricities of the movie are still in there, like cutting pizza with scissors. I wish to God we actually had I guess you could call it the director's cut of the movie, because a lot of the blood, a lot of the kill shots, all that stuff is still in there. You know, it was even considered rated X at the time. Now, rated X in 1980, violence-wise, is pretty much standard today. It's rated R today. We get away with a lot more violence today than we did in the 80s. So if I did see that version, I probably wouldn't be that surprised by it. It's still probably pretty tame. But even as it is, there are some nice bloody scenes in this movie. It is probably the closest to a slasher movie that an action movie can be, kind of similar to the first Terminator. But anyway, jumping into the movie, the very beginning, I love this opening. How you have all the cops, they're at this grocery store, and we have this seedy character entering the grocery store, and he's kind of the member of, I guess, the New World Order, the Night Slashers. And this is a group of characters that want to eliminate the weak and pretty much have the cream of the crop, the strong, rule the world. It's a pretty cheesy plot at face value, but that's who the villains are. It's a pretty unrealistic plot, really, if you think about it. I mean, this group of people that just want to kill off the weak, but it serves its purpose for the plot of this movie. But anyway, this guy, he's in the grocery store, and he kills an innocent person. He tells him, run, you're free, and then he kills him. So the cops, they have to call the Cobra. That's literally what they call it, call the Cobra. And the Cobra is a member of the Zombie Squad. Quick side note, Stallone actually got the idea of the Zombie Squad from a real, I guess they called them the Zombie Squad in Belgium. It was like a Belgian police force, but this was a police force that operated at night under their own terms, and they got away with a lot of stuff that's not really by the book. So you have this character, Monty, played by Andrew Robinson, who is constantly on Cobra's back throughout the whole movie. He really becomes annoying after a while. I mean, it's almost like, okay, we get the point. This guy is completely against Cobra's way of doing things. But I digress. He shows up at the grocery store. Right away, Stallone, he just owns this role, you know, as silly and as over the top as it is, and no pun intended. Stallone just really has this like vibrato about him that a lot of people probably couldn't pull off.
Hey, dirtbag. You're a lousy shot. I don't like lousy shots. You wasted a kid for nothing. Now I think it's time to waste you.
There's a few times where you're definitely going to chuckle, even like that opening monologue. He owns it and he carries it through, but it does come off as kind of silly, kind of cheesy. But this opening does what a great opening should do in an action movie. It gets you interested. It makes you completely interested in who Cobra is as a character. And it kind of sets up the villains for how dangerous they are too. I mean, these are people that are, they don't mind killing people at all. You know, this is a very dangerous threat. So then, fast forward, we meet our damsel in distress, played by Brigitte Nielsen, who was married to Stallone at the time. Her name is Ingrid in the movie. And I like to call this section the Halloween 2 section of the movie because a lot of this section takes place in the hospital. And funny enough, Brigitte Nielsen wears a wig in the scene, much like Jamie Lee Curtis wore a wig in Halloween 2. And then all of a sudden you got the Night Slashers. The leader of the Night Slashers, played by Brian Thompson, comes into frame. And Brian Thompson, I think, is one of the most underrated villains of the 80s. This villain, at face value, you don't really get that much behind the character. And really behind the scenes, Brian Thompson, he wanted to know more about the character. He would literally I don't want to say beg, but he would, he would ask the producers, he would ask Stallone, give me more about this character, because I'm really interested in the character and I want to bring forth as much as I can. And he didn't really get that much information. Stallone pretty much said, you are pretty much just the embodiment of evil. That's all you need to know. And that's what he brought forth to the character. He doesn't really say that much along the way, and I think that was a good choice, actually, because by the end of the movie, you bought it. And visually, Brian Thompson, he's definitely got like a Schwarzenegger type look to him, but he is a threat. He is a formidable foe not to be messed with. And funny enough, behind the scenes, Brian Thompson almost didn't get the part because they said he was too nice. He was just a very friendly guy. And then in the audition, he was able to turn it on and become the Night Slasher. Also, you got this weapon that he carries that is one of the most unique and signature knives that I've ever seen on film. And that's intentional. Stallone wanted a knife in this movie that would be remembered for the rest of time. And it really is. It's kind of a trademark of Cobra. But Ingrid barely escapes death. And so throughout the rest of the movie, the Night Slashers, they are hunting her. So Cobra and his partner, they pretty much are in a protective role of Ingrid throughout the rest of the movie. Now, Brigitte Nielsen is probably one of my least favorite parts of this movie. I don't think her acting is that bad, but I do think she really is pretty much a damsel in distress. She doesn't really fight back that much. I think in the hospital scene, she did the best she could, of course. It is the most intense scene, but then from the hospital scene, they start building this like romance between Cobra and Ingrid. And to me, it doesn't really work that well. It gets in the way of the movie. And funny enough, they were married at the time. So they should have had, I guess, much more chemistry, but the chemistry I don't think was there. So that is probably my one big flaw of the movie. And also there's this montage with Robert Tepper, this Angel of the City thing, where Cobra's making the rounds trying to find information on the Night Slasher. And she's doing this whole like modeling gig with all these robots around. And it's really strange. There's a lot of strange stuff in Cobra, actually. Now, jumping into like the slasher section of this movie, I say this is a slasher movie. Like I said, that hospital scene, very dark, very sinister. It really feels like a slasher movie. And being that the first half of this movie is like at night most of the time, and then you have a lot of stalking going on, it's like you're watching a slasher movie. It really is. I think the second half of the movie is more in the action realm. You got this big car chase with the motorcycles and everything. But then it jumps back into like horror territory in the very last act where they're at this like sheet metal factory. I think when you have like a metal factory at the end of any movie like Terminator 2, it just adds to the scene. And you got this big showdown between the Night Slasher and Cobra. And you know, they're duking it out and everything. There's this one scene, you know, the Let's Bleed Pig scene is probably one of the most iconic scenes of the movie.
Let's bleed, pig!
But there's one part where we know Cobra, he's gonna shoot him. But the Night Slasher tells him, you have to take me in. You can't shoot me. You have to abide by the law.
You won't shoot. Murder is against the law. You have to take me in.
And so it brings forth this like moral issue with Cobretti. And he pretty much has to fight the guy. You have this iconic fight where Cobra literally picks the guy up and puts him on this hook, Texas Chainsaw Massacre style. And you get this visual ending that is so badass and just so memorable. I think Cobra has one of the better endings out of all the like action movies out there. And there's a lot of great action movies out there. Now I was talking about like the eccentricities of Cobra, you know, the cutting of the pizza. I like the scene where he like pulls into his apartment and you have this group of gang members and Cobra literally like pushes their car. That 1950 Mercury that he has, which was actually Stallone's car at the time, is another signature part of the movie. We all love badass cars in action movies, you know, and I think the only car that trumps the 1950 Mercury might be the DeLorean from Back to the Future. You know, it's just one of the most memorable cars I've ever seen on film. But throughout this whole movie, they never let up on how much of a badass Cobra is. Like I said, it's almost comedic at points. It really is comedic at points. And to bounce off that, Stallone made the character like this health nut. And when his partner gets really mad at Monty and he tells him, you know what your problem is? You're too angry. It's all that violence.
You know what the trouble with you is?
Too violent. It's all that sugar you're eating.
Which is ironic because Cobra is a very violent character. So you have these nice comedic moments because Stallone is actually a funny guy. I mean, if you look behind the scenes, if you look at interviews with the guy, he is always a really funny guy. He just doesn't do that many comedies. Every time he does a comedy, it fails miserably. So how it works is he injects a little bit of his own style of comedy in his action movies. Even in like the Rocky movies, there's a lot of comedy in there. I think he's really good at using comedy in a more realistic way with his characters. And I think that's even better because it makes his characters memorable. And Cobra is a very memorable character. So memorable that it's one of the few movies that I'm shocked they never made a sequel. They planned on doing a sequel, but they just never did. And I think there are quite a few reasons why Cobra lives on, why people still talk about it, why it is my banner on my YouTube channel. I think the reason is a visual reason. There's so many visual, iconic moments throughout the movie that just make it a great action movie. From the glasses and the match. Director Nicholas Winding Refn, who directed Drive, was a huge Cobra fan. I guess is a huge Cobra fan. So much so that that's the reason why Ryan Gosling has the toothpick in his mouth in Drive. It's an homage to Cobra. And also, before I go, the score in this movie is very effective too. And again, it feels like a horror type of score. The scene at the end where there's this big gun shootout, the music in that scene is so intense. I believe they actually use that music in Over the Top as well. So Stallone likes really intense music. And if it has to be horror type music, so be it. If it works for the scene, then that's what he's gonna do. So guys, in the end, of course, I'm gonna give Cobra a high purchase worthy. You wonder why I don't give it a Trapped on an Island, being that it's my banner on my YouTube channel. I think that's just an honest rating for it. I think it does cross the line in absurdity at points. I think there's a lot of scenes that you can laugh at in Cobra, but it's the type of movie that you just have a blast watching, you know? So it's acceptable laughter, and it owns it all the way through. You know, like I said, it never pokes its head out and says, okay, we get it, we're stupid. So anyway, guys, post your thoughts on Cobra in the comments. Looking forward to hearing them. Glad to have VHS reviews back. Let me know in the comments some other VHS reviews you'd like me to do, actually. I have quite the collection behind me now. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day, and on Fridays, we do Free For All Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and you're the disease. I'm the cure.